This series is dedicated to Brother Steve Coakley.
To the intelligence community that they were running out of time in terms of Jesse being a plausible replacement. That soon, Martin said it in the public, I hate Jesse Jackson. Then that would kill him forever. Now all the things I'm gonna show you they did after his death. Remember, we looked at last week, Jackie Jackson said that Martin was in a what? A media slump. That the media Martin was getting was little, if bad. And we know the FBI was sending out much of that. Post Martin's assassination, on this article that pumps Jesse as the new emerging leader, May 24th, 1968, New York Times. Write that down, May 24th, 1968, New York Times. In that article, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, handsome, like fried chicken and pinto beans. That story, I'm gonna read you that story. But next to that story, it condemns the Poor People's Campaign as a fraud. And next to the same story, it plays Jesse up as the greatest Negro leader since Moses.
Why haven't Negroes in America been able to effectively organize a national political institution for themselves without the influence of those people? Is it because Black people lack the capacity to organize anything other than a cookout effectively? Is it because that if left to their own devices and leadership, Negroes would effectively consolidate into a canister of cutthroat crustaceans? Or is there a secret, serpentine hand pulling the strings of Black puppets? Is there really a secret scheme to sabotage any form of Negro-led organization? And if there isn't any conspiracy against Negroes, why has the government tried so hard to eliminate indigenous American leadership?
Directly west from Chicago's famed Loop District. For the first several hours, no significant shooting incidents were reported. The word sniper was not heard. Now that has changed. Several deaths have been reported, including 2 Negroes police said were killed by sniper fire in this, the heart of the ghetto. The number of arrests is in the hundreds. Special booking and bonding arrangements are already being made for tomorrow.
In our last episode, we took a wild racial ride with Rachel and Susan on the Freedom Bus through the heart of the Civil Rights Movement. From the landmark Brown versus Board of Education case in the 50s to the March on Washington in 63. We even found a lost tape of the infamous MLG, Marcus Luther Garvey. We covered approximately up until the summer of 1963. In this episode, we are diving into the next chapter of racial and political chaos. Prepare yourselves for some of the most infamous assassinations in American history. This era from 63 to 69 is like a crazy episode of House of Cards. Except for this shit actually happened. The march was in August, But by November, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. At the time of the killing, which took place on camera, an unforgettable moment in television history. Not only was the Kennedy assassination the first murder televised, but the first live murder on television is also connected to the same event. Only 2 days later, Lee Harvey Oswald, the supposed assassin, was murdered live on television. This gave life to the mafioso credo, dead rats can't squeal, and neither can dead patsies. But no matter the rat or the patsy, by consequence of their murder, a smorgasbord of conspiratorial speculation is easily manifested and cooked at the tables of the critical-minded.
You killed the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
You have been.
Nobody said what?
Sir?
You have been.
Nobody said what? Okay, we ain't hear you there. Okay.
What did you do in Russia?
And now we know, beyond any doubt, the story of the Kennedy assassination they've been trying to pass off for more than 60 years now is complete bullshit. Moreover, the government is guilty of using the media to lie and deceive the public. But even more unbelievable than that, a secret faction within the government called for the murder of the commander-in-chief. And even crazier than that, his vice president, Texas-born Lyndon B. Johnson, used his home field advantage to set up the entire thing. With the help of the CIA, of course, whom Kennedy personally threatened to strip down to the bones after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the failed coup attempt on Cuba and Castro. This led to the firing of CIA Director Allen Dulles. In short, Castro kicked the CIA's ass and made Kennedy look bad. Add to the fact that the CIA had been dishonestly dealing with the president and deliberately feeding him disinformation about the secret campaign in Cuba in order to manipulate him out of money and into malinformed decisions. This caused Kennedy to threaten to put the entire agency on the chopping block. Beyond the details and the minutiae of the events that led up to the Kennedy assassination, this instance establishes itself as an example and a test case for comprehending the general mode of operation used by the government, the media, and the secret hand that controls both. Their objectives are to disinform and manipulate, to peddle panic, to monger fear, and all of this should lead by their design into unquestioned obedience. So by 1964, the American public was well under an ongoing psyop, perpetuated by the government with the help of the media. And this disillusionment was only exacerbated by the colonial covert fuckery going on in Southeast Asia that would eventually lead to America entering Vietnam.
Ho's government has fled to the jungle. It is no new experience for this guerrilla veteran who fought the Japanese from these hills, sometimes with secret American OSS help. In this mountain hideout, the guerrillas, who call themselves the Viet Minh, mapped the long war against France. Theirs is a people's army. As Ho has predicted, it is now rapidly becoming a communist army. Its tactics, as well as its indoctrination, are borrowed from Mao Zedong's Chinese Communist Handbook. Weapons are often crude and homemade. Instruction is brief, but to the point.
It's important to note that the war in Vietnam was really a carryover from World War II between Japan and France in the land then called Indochina. French Indochina was invaded and taken over by the Japanese after the war. The Japanese established the Empire of Vietnam and installed their own puppet regime with Bao Dai as the figurehead puppet leader. But even after that, the Japanese were pushed out, and Vietnam tried to establish its own independence. But the French and British immediately swoop in to set up a coup to overthrow the recently liberated Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Under the Truman Doctrine, the U.S. vowed to assist any country in any conflict with a communist government. This was the reason why the U.S. had already spent billions of dollars helping the French long before they entered Vietnam. Yet, despite the Cold War conflict, conspiracy, and controversy, the reason the U.S. entered the war in Vietnam was a complete fabrication. But of course, the public didn't know that. And in less than a year after the murder of John F. Kennedy, and in the middle of a presidential election, Lyndon B. Johnson urges Congress to attack Vietnam, completely based upon false information. This pattern of fabricating false events in order to channel support for war is something we see the government do even unto this day. The Gulf of Tonkin being no exception, but the rule.
Shortly thereafter, on August 7th, the U.S. Congress passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which gave President Johnson blanket approval to continue his policies in Vietnam, and specifically allowed the President, as Commander-in-Chief, to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. In essence, the Tonkin Gulf Resolution gave the President the power to make war in the absence of a congressional declaration of war.
Quote, Charlton's Web. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was an international confrontation that led to the United States engaging more directly in the Vietnam War. It consisted of a confrontation on the 2nd of August, 1964, when United States forces were carrying out covert amphibious operations close to North Vietnamese territorial waters, which triggered a response from North Vietnamese forces. The United States falsely claimed that a second incident occurred on the 4th of August between North Vietnamese and United States ships in the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin. Originally, U.S. military claims blamed North Vietnam for the confrontation and the ostensible, but in fact imaginary, incident on August 4th. Later investigation revealed that the second attack never happened. The NSA, an agency of the U.S. Defense Department, had deliberately skewed intelligence to create the impression that an attack had been carried out. End quote. And thus, America enters Vietnam in 1964. I wonder what sort of compromise the government could use to get Negroes to support this war. In July 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson meets with Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act was used by Johnson hoping to ingratiate himself with the colored voting public. This act was out of character for Lyndon B. Johnson, a well-known racist who is quoted as saying, "If you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on. He'll empty his pockets for you." LBJ had a well-known aversion to the colored folk, so the signing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 was more of a political scheme to brainwash the colored folk into Democratic allegiance. LBJ is also quoted saying this, "These niggers, they're getting pretty uppity these days, and that's a problem for us. Since they've got something now they never had before, the political pull to back up their uppityness. Now we've got to do something about this. We've got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down, not enough to make a difference. I'll have them niggers voting Democrat for the next 200 years." The signing of the Civil Rights Act happened in the middle of a presidential election between Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson and Republican Barry Goldwater.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark, we must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
The next flagship assassination of the 60s occurred in February 1965 at the Audubon Ballroom in the heart of Harlem. During his final speech, according to witnesses, an argument breaks out during the speech, with one person saying, "Get your hand out of my pocket." The security detail leaves his side to patrol the conflict, and as they tend to the ruckus, one man approaches the podium with a shotgun in hand and fires a shot, wounding Malcolm X in the chest. Immediately afterwards, two other men armed with handguns unleash a barrage of bullets, ultimately killing him. In the chaotic aftermath, the shooters tried to escape the event, but one shooter was caught and beaten by the crowd of supporters. But just as he was being overwhelmed by the beatdown, the police intervene and intercept the man later identified as Thomas Hagen away from the crowd and into safety. Another gunman was also whisked away by the police before getting caught, according to the narrative. This tumultuous, world-changing scene was recreated in Spike Lee's epic biopic, Malcolm X. The scene depicted in the movie aligns somewhat accurately with the testimonies given by most people who witnessed the event in real time. We explained in episode 10, The Cross and Crescent, the events of Malcolm's life that led up to this moment. To understand the context of Malcolm's assassination, we explored significant chapters of his life. We detailed his clashes with the Nation of Islam and the estrangement that brewed in an environment rife with threats against his life. Alongside the nation's animosity, the FBI extensively surveilled Malcolm, orchestrating a campaign of disinformation and disruption that sought to further divide him from the organization. Malcolm became a target of the FBI's infamous COINTEL program, which aimed at discrediting prominent Black leaders. The classified documents revealed that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover instructed his agents to do something about Malcolm X, deploying informants and provocateurs within the Nation of Islam to instigate strife and distrust among its members.
Federal fuckboy number 1. COINTELPRO top player, hater, and fraud initiator was the racist mulatto homosexual J. Edgar Hoover. Jedgar rose through the ranks after graduating from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He first started working at the Library of Congress, where he learned the value of collecting information and snitching on niggas. He is credited with initiating the collection of fingerprints and establishing a database to snitch on niggas. He worked at the Department of Justice and eventually started working at the Bureau of Investigations, which was the predecessor to the FBI.
Referred to some press report that Mr. Muhammad had once been found guilty of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He failed to explain purposely.
Between the years 1962 and 1963, Malcolm uncovered a scandal that would deepen his rift with Elijah Muhammad. The revelation that Muhammad had fathered at least 7 children with 6 different young women, all of whom had been excommunicated from the Nation of Islam. Although Malcolm neither publicized these findings nor sought to exploit them, his probing was considered an attack on Elijah Muhammad's integrity, leading to open hostility from the nation and his eventual estrangement. This is when, as Malcolm puts it, the nation and its members became outwardly antagonistic toward him. It is commonly believed that this discovery of the impregnated young women was at the heart of the rift between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Malcolm made a controversial remark, framing the assassination as chickens coming home to roost. A statement that brought him negative attention, and by proxy, the Nation of Islam.
And when I said chickens coming home to roost, chickens coming home to roost, I said the same thing.
But you did not say that you were glad the president was killed.
No, that's what the press said. What would I look like saying that I'm glad the president was killed?
As a supposed consequence of this statement, Malcolm was ultimately gag ordered for 90 days and put on suspension from speaking in public by Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm later stated that he believed that this punishment was used as a pretext to diminish his influence within the organization if he ever were to reveal the controversy surrounding Muhammad. After serving his suspension, Malcolm had officially defected from the nation. During the same year, he embarked on his pilgrimage to Mecca. While on his pilgrimage, he takes notice of several intelligence agents shadowing him at various locations. He described these agents as operating beyond the scope of what the nation was capable of. Later, he travels to Africa, where he is hosted by several leaders as an honored guest. He then makes a tour of Europe, speaking to large crowds of white intellectuals, whom he had once referred to as white devils. His rhetoric transitioned, distancing him from his earlier teachings within the nation. This shift in ideology infuriated the most zealous followers of Elijah Muhammad. The members of NOI resented his newfound popularity among the devils, and he was branded a traitor by the nation.
2 of the sisters had 2 children by the same man, and one of those 2 sisters was pregnant still, getting ready to have a 3rd child by the same man. So when it was known among the Chicago officials that I had a knowledge of this, they become very fearful of me. They became very antagonistic toward me, and they had to do something to diminish the authority that I had, for fear that if this became public knowledge, the followers would leave the Muslim movement and follow me. And it was at that time that they used the statement that I made against President Kennedy as a pretext to cut my authority, and some other things happened that finally produced the split, or forced the split. And when I made the split, the only reason that I didn't make this public knowledge was I knew the implications, and I felt that if the Muslims who were in the Nation of Islam knew it, that which enabled them to be so strongly religious and exercise moral discipline would be shattered, and it would cause all of them to go right back and start doing the things that they had been doing previously.
Who is the father of all of these various children whom you have enumerated?
The first one to tell me who the father was Wallace Muhammad, and he told me that the father was Elijah Muhammad himself. One of the sisters, he went to the home of one of the sisters, and when he walked in the door, she says, "I want to let you see something." And she showed him her child. She said, "Here's your brother, and your father is the father of this child." And then I questioned the sisters myself, because I was shook up. And they admitted to me that Elijah Muhammad was the father of their children. And I took it to him. And it was at that time he told me that he was Muhammad, the prophet, and that Muhammad had 9 wives. He also told me that he was David. He was the modern David, and that he was the modern Solomon, and that it was meant for him to fulfill today all of the things that they did back there.
And how many of these illegitimate children did he father with the sisters?
Well, he made 6 sisters pregnant. They all had children. 2 of those 6 had 2 children. One of those 2 is having a child right now. I am told that there is a 7th sister who is supposed to be in Mexico right now, and she's supposed to be having a child by him.
By 1964, assassination attempts were being made on his life.
You mean he was going to kill you?
Oh, yes. One of them was, an attempt was made to get one of them to wire my car with an explosive. That one is with me right now. Well, fortunately, while I was among the Muslims, I never lived beyond my means, and I have learned how to live within means. And I still have the clothes that that was provided for me at that time. I'm in the house that was provided for me, although we're in a court battle, they're trying to get it back. And I have made this statement to them concerning the house, that they could have it. If they would take me back, that they would permit me to come before the Muslim movement, the rank and file, and explain or defend myself against all of the charges that they've made against me, they could have the house. But they are going contrary to their own laws by standing up in the mosque and indicting me, but never giving me a chance to defend myself. And they say that no one can judge me but Mr. Muhammad. In this case, Mr. Muhammad can't sit as judge because he's involved in the case.
Elijah Muhammad says of the Muslims, "We carry no arms, and we do not seek to win victory with arms. We do nothing to others that we would not have done unto us."
The 2 brothers were sent after me with revolvers by Joseph, the captain of the Fruit in New York. They were armed. When a Muslim is attacked, and you'll find this to be the pattern, when the Muslims were attacked in Monroe, Louisiana, Elijah Muhammad gave no signal to anybody across the nation to come to the defense of their brothers. When our brothers were attacked in Los Angeles, again, Elijah Muhammad gave no signal to anybody to come to the defense of those brothers. Never have the Muslims anywhere in the country gotten any kind of instruction from the national office or headquarters on how to defend themselves when they are attacked by outsiders. The only times the Muslims have ever been given any instructions to commit violence is when that violence is directed against a fellow Muslim. His followers are violent against Negroes.
Are you not, perhaps, afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes.
I probably am a dead man already.
It has long been believed that Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam were involved in the murder of Malcolm. But Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan has remained steadfast in his claim that Elijah Muhammad was not involved in the assassination, and furthermore states that he was told himself by Elijah Muhammad to leave him alone.
Malcolm went out of the nation. We all were hurt. At least I can speak for myself. I loved him. Next to Elijah Muhammad, I didn't know anybody greater than Malcolm X. It hurt me that he would go out of the nation. But then the worst hurt was Malcolm going to Mike Wallace, telling Mike Wallace, and listen to the words now, Elijah Muhammad fathered children from his teenage secretaries. So Malcolm raised it to a moral issue. Listen to me carefully. Putting himself in the righteous position, putting his teacher in an immoral position, but then he's going to the white man to tell the white man what his leader and teacher had done. He did it with Mike Wallace. You can't deny this. This is actual fact. He came here to Chicago and went to Cupsinet. When has Cupsinet been a friend of black people? And he told Cup, Elijah Muhammad, I thought he was a man. Fathered these children and wouldn't, in other words, kept it a secret and whatnot. I found that he was less man than I thought. Oh, he dogged the messenger. The man that took him from a pimp, from a hustler, from a stick-up man, and sent him before the world. Now he's dogging his teacher. What do you think we felt? Elijah Muhammad wasn't just a leader. That's our spiritual guide and father, brother. You don't have to order me to kill you. If you attack my father, my orders come from my love. I want you to hear me good, because every Muslim that loved Elijah Muhammad would have killed Malcolm if we had gotten a chance. No, I don't need no damn applause. I want you to think now. We didn't incite that. Malcolm incited that in us. He would have been dead. He would never have lasted a year. Elijah Muhammad told us, leave him alone. Leave him alone. Told me to my face, leave him alone.
In 1966, Thomas Hagen, Muhammad Aziz, and Khalil Islam were sentenced to 20 years to life in prison for the murder of Malcolm X. But as it turns out, 2 of the men were innocent and had been falsely accused of murder. At some point during the trial process, court records show that Hagen confessed to the murder himself and stated adamantly that Aziz and Islam had nothing to do with the plot. But the jury didn't buy his story, suspecting that he was attempting to save his other 2 co-conspirators by falling on the sword himself. In the late 70s, Hagen submitted 2 affidavits, again reestablishing his claim that the other 2 men were not involved in the assassination plot. In his affidavits, he identifies 4 men from the Nation of Islam Newark Temple, number 25. He named Wilbur McKinley as the man who created the diversion and threw a smoke bomb just moments before William Bradley, whom he also identified, shot Malcolm on stage with a shotgun. Hagen then states, after the shotgun blast, that he and another man he identifies as Leon Davis, both armed with pistols, repeatedly fired shots into the body of Malcolm. Despite these affidavits, the courts did not revisit the case, fearing the ramifications of exposing a larger conspiracy, which would implicate the courts, police, and intelligence agencies. And that would have been a disaster. After spending over 2 decades in prison for the murder of Malcolm, both men, Islam and Aziz, were paroled in 1985 and 1987. Khalil Islam died in 2009, never being officially absolved of guilt. And in 2022, both men were exonerated by the courts. Muhammad Aziz was 84 at the time his name was cleared. The confessed killer, Thomas Hagen, was paroled in 2010. Muhammad Aziz filed a lawsuit against New York City, the state of New York, and the federal government. In 2022, they settled for $36 million. Thus, the real question of who killed Malcolm is much more complicated than just identifying the triggerman, or in this case, triggermen. The question is, who orchestrated the plot to assassinate him? And is everyone involved guilty of murder themselves? At the time of the case 60 years ago, it was determined in court that the FBI, under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, intentionally withheld key evidence that would have vindicated the two men. It was also found that the NYPD played a significant role in the conspiracy surrounding Malcolm's murder. According to records, the NYPD had several undercover agents in the Audubon Ballroom at the time of the assassination, and those agents had prior knowledge of the impending attack and purposely chose not to intervene. In a deathbed confession, former NYPD officer Woods stated that both the FBI and NYPD conspired against Malcolm, further asserting that police officers were tasked with undermining civil rights organizations and drawing Malcolm's security into compromising situations in order to provoke them into arrest. 2 members of Malcolm's security detail were arrested just days before his assassination. It was also discovered that the district attorney during the case had made false statements and colluded with the NYPD to conceal the identities of undercover agents and police officers who had participated in the surveillance of Malcolm X and those who were present at the assassination. These discoveries alone point to a larger conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of the upper echelons of government officials, from the NYPD to the FBI and the New York state courts. So again, the question isn't who killed Malcolm, but going all the way to the top of the government hierarchy between the NYPD, the CIA, the FBI, and any other government institution. How many dozens to hundreds of people are guilty of the murder of just one man?
If I had my way, I would do all in the electric dance.
One of the reasons that I'm in no way reluctant or hesitant to do whatever is necessary to see that black people do something to protect themselves, I honestly believe that the day that they do, many whites will have more respect for them.
Less than a week after the murder of Malcolm X, another man, Jimmy Lee Jackson, was murdered in Alabama. Jackson was a deacon at a Baptist church and was murdered by Alabama state troopers during a peaceful voter rights march. The 26-year-old Jackson was a member of the SCLC. His murder would lead to the march in Selma. In response to this murder, James Bevel, the head of the SCLC Selma voter drive, called for a march of dramatic length from Selma to Montgomery. Now, to put this idea into perspective, it's important to know that Selma is over 50 miles from Montgomery. So what Bevel was proposing was a march of 50 plus miles, broken up over days, halting traffic through some of the most racist parts of the country. If we can't vote, y'all can't drive. As bright of an idea as this march seemed to be, not everybody was on board. Not because it wasn't a great idea, but because Martin Luther King was not present for the sake of publicity. The objective of the march wasn't necessarily to protest the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson or a call for justice, but rather doubling down on voter rights. However, when Governor George Wallace heard these plans, he deemed the march a threat to public safety, vowing to stop any attempts to carry it out. He issued a warning declaring there will be no march between Selma and Montgomery, and he ordered the Alabama Highway Patrol to use whatever means necessary to prevent the march from taking place. On the 7th of March, the march begins. The protesters make it just 6 blocks before trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where the local Ritz renegade and police are prepared to stop the marching monkeys dead in their place.
To be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly, this march will not continue. Troopers here, advance toward the group.
The pigs and their newly deputized patrol posse blocked the marchers from continuing the march and told the marchers to scram. Hosea Williams from the SCLC then tries to plead with the pigs to proceed, but his request falls on deaf albino ears. With tensions mounting, the malicious mayonnaise mafia initiated unprovoked attacks on the marchers after they did not disperse with the preferred haste they were told. The pink pillagers commenced to manhandling the marchers, mushing men and women, throwing them to the ground and beating them with billy clubs. They tear-gassed the crowd, and mounted officers barreled through the crowd on horseback. John Lewis ended up getting his head busted wide open.
To the white meat.
In all, over 60 people were injured and more than a dozen hospitalized. Images of this skirmish were televised nationwide, after which it was time to break out the raisins and animal crackers and ride out on the protest tip like a jive turkey. Bloody Sunday triggered demonstrations nationwide, with SNCC leading the charge, holding protests in several locations from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. But the president was not impressed. LBJ responded to the press saying, "I refuse to be blackjacked by unruly pressure groups full of niggers." I may have embellished a bit. Despite this statement, Johnson would soon after begin drawing up plans for the Voting Rights Act. A second march was then planned as a result of Bloody Sunday, because what's better than one beatdown? 2 beatdowns. Then the protesters get a surprise caller, and the caller says, "Who all gonna be over there?" That's right. That boy MLK decided to drop in on the scene, making sure to hit the front page of the news headlines. Now, with We Was Kang in their midst, the guerrillas were ready to hit the streets like Black Friday. But not so fast. District Court Judge Frank Johnson threw a wrench in the monkeys' plan to march by issuing a restraining order prohibiting the march from taking place until additional hearings could be held on the matter. In the meantime, Lyndon B. Johnson sent representatives to parley with King to convince him to postpone the march. Leroy Collins, former Florida governor, was sent to represent the president. Collins negotiated with King, attempting to convince him to take a different route. His master plan? To march to the bridge and turn around, as an homage to the happenings on Bloody Sunday. King acquiesced to the suggestion posed by Collins, but only with the guarantee they would not catch another beatdown by the police. On March 9th, Martin Luther King and over 2,000 people set out on their march to the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
This church was headquarters in the Negro drive for the right to vote, and it was here that Martin Luther King came to lend his support to the campaign. He pointed out that from Selma's 14,000 Negroes, only a few more than 300 had been registered at the polls. When one group set out to march to the Capitol at Montgomery, the procession was broken up violently by state troopers and sheriff's deputies. Then Dr. King led another contingent through the town. This time, there is no violence. The 1,000 Negroes and 400 white ministers and civil rights workers reach the end of the bridge where the cordon of troopers stand. They are ordered to turn back.
As they arrive at the bridge, they hold a short prayer and then turn back instead of crossing the bridge, as the terms of the agreement specify.
They are ordered to turn back. Dr. King confers with the police as the marchers hold their ground. He requests that they be allowed to pray. There are a few minutes of mounting tension. The request to pray is granted, and they kneel in the streets. Informants say that Dr. King turned his marchers at the behest of the White House, an arrangement that had been made in advance to avoid a confrontation that could only end in bloodshed. The troops and deputies stand stolidly by as the prayers are said and the marchers go back to Selma. This Alabama town will go down in the history books as a turning point in the civil rights drive. From the halls of Congress to the smallest crossroads hamlet, people can understand the plea that no American can have freedom and justice unless there is freedom and justice for all. In Selma, there is a lesson to be learned.
But not everyone was feeling Turnaround Tuesday, causing King to lose some cool points amongst his support base, especially within the SNCC. On the 17th of the same month, a judge ruled in favor of the protesters, saying their protest is protected by the First Amendment. Quote, "The law was clear that the right to petition one's government for the redress of grievances may be exercised in large groups. These rights may be exercised by marching, even along public highways." End quote. This meant those monkeys could march on any road they wanted to. LBJ and Alabama Governor George Wallace had been going back and forth on whether the state should provide security for the marchers. Understanding that he could not circumvent states' rights after Wallace refuses, Johnson federalizes the National Guard for the purposes of protecting the marchers. The marchers were all granted permission from the federal government to continue with their march to Montgomery. By this time, this event has drawn national attention, which meant thousands of new faces from different races are now involved. If the police wanted to beat King, they would have to beat the force field of Jews that surrounded him. The march began in Selma on the 21st, but with dramatically more people. Over 7,000 people met at Brown Chapel Amy Zion Church to begin the 50-plus mile trek to Montgomery. Most people only showed up to the march on the first day. As the crowds and roads got smaller, marchers were limited to only 300 during the two-lane portions of the highway route. Most marchers who actually participated took turns and marched in day shifts, replacing others along the way. On the night before the final day, a star-studded celebrity concert was held at St. Jude, with Sammy Davis, Nina Simone, Peter, Paul and Mary, Tony Bennett, and Harry Belafonte all performing at the event. On the final leg of the march, over 20,000 people showed up to march into the heart of Montgomery. The march ended on the 25th at the Alabama state capitol, with King delivering his "How long, not long" speech. For as much as the violence of Bloody Sunday had been propagated and played up by the national media, ironically, the only people to die during the marches were white people. In both cases, Reeb from Boston and Liuzzo from Detroit, they were both allegedly murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. At least one COINTELPRO agent, Gary Rowe, was involved in her murder. As a result of all these events, Lyndon B. Johnson signs into law the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
There is no moral issue. It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country. But really, it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
I'll have them niggas voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
All of you, on the back seat too. Get your hands up, I said. Drop that purse and get your hands up. Get your hands up! Get them up. Get your hands up. Let's go. Come on. Right this way.
Negro leaders blamed it on a variety of social ailments. Poverty and unemployment, poor schools, and bad housing, all of which add up to discrimination. But most of all, said the Negro spokesman, police brutality. And the mobs agreed.
Get in with the light.
But the police were not the only targets. Firemen rushing about the city trying to control dozens of blazes at once were showered with rocks and bottles and sometimes found themselves under heavy gunfire.
Control 12, calling staff region.
The mobs hated authority, but more generally, they hated all whites.
The United States faced a period of urban unrest characterized by widespread riots in cities across the nation. Among the most significant were the Watts riots, which drew national attention to the simmering issues of the conditions of the streets. Despite advancements in voter rights, serious challenges remained in areas such as housing and employment, creating an undercurrent of tension that often erupted in violence. Frustration over these inequities and ongoing police brutality transformed many blocks into battlegrounds, further exacerbating the conflict between the brothers and the pigs.
Harlem or South Chicago, where steaming, rat-ridden tenements are the raw material of riot, seemed the most likely to produce those northern explosions that were predicted in white America's anxiety over the Negro Revolution. No one expected the flashpoint of discontent to be in the sprawling, bungalowed 450 square miles of Los Angeles.
The campaign, called Operation Breadbasket, has been going on for 2 years, and it's run by Negro ministers from Dr. Martin Luther King's civil rights movement.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Operation Breadbasket believes that black pride stems from black economic power, and the boycott is one way to get that power. Every Saturday morning, Operation Breadbasket meets in a Baptist church to hear its leader, Reverend Jesse Jackson.
In 1966, Jesse Jackson was appointed to lead the Chicago branch of Operation Breadbasket. This was the first time that Jackson had been appointed to a major position with MLK and the SCLC. Jackson had been lobbying for this role since he first met King. Operation Breadbasket aimed to leverage selective patronage and implement boycotts against supermarkets and businesses that failed to hire from black communities while profiting from their consumer spending. The initiative sought to pressure these companies to diversify their workforce, solidifying Jackson's status within King's inner circle. As violence continued to escalate in black neighborhoods in the following years, the FBI launched its own covert initiative known as the Ghetto Informant Program. This program shifted its focus from infiltrating recognized organizations such as the Nation of Islam to monitoring and gathering intelligence on the street and in urban communities. The Ghetto Informant Program relied on local sources such as local popular citizens, including business owners and gang members, to provide insights into neighborhood dynamics and to identify key targets. This Ghetto Informant Program operated without any oversight from the courts or Congress, fertilizing the already well-watered seeds of corruption within the government.
Well, I think this is just the beginning of a massive outpouring of concern and a massive outpouring of protest activities concerning this unjust war. I can't give you any programmatic action right now or any dates for the next action program, but I would just say today represents a beginning rather than an end.
In the year leading up to 1968, Martin Luther King found himself at the center of escalating tensions surrounding his civil rights movement, which included a barrage of death threats. This environment of turmoil necessitated the hiring of police and security for his personal safety. While some threats emerged from various sources, some emerged from within the government. Notably, 3 years prior, in 1965, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI sent King a letter denouncing his extramarital affairs and labeling him a fraud, seemingly aiming to drive him to suicide. So by 1968, threats against King intensified from multiple directions, leading him to suspect that some originated from the FBI, especially since he opposed the war in Vietnam. His stance positioned him in direct conflict with both the FBI and Lyndon B. Johnson. Despite the fact that King and Johnson had both collaborated on 2 civil rights bills, King argued that the vast resources allocated to the Vietnam War would be better spent addressing social inequality in the United States, and he condemned the war for its devastating toll on civilians, particularly children. Although he had never strayed from his nonviolent approach, constant surveillance by the FBI throughout that year, which determined he was not a significant threat for instigating large-scale violence, King was still labeled a potentially dangerous black extremist.
Well, I say it is frightening, and it should be frightened to the entire American people that he has demanded $10 billion. And if he doesn't get it, then there may be riots this summer. Martin Luther King is nothing but a blackmailer, and he should be arrested for blackmailing because he certainly has blackmailed the United States government.
There's one thing that bothers me, and that, as a Negro yourself, why do you talk so bitterly against Martin Luther King and a lot of these other people of your race?
Well, let me tell you something. I don't put my race before I do my country. Being a Negro woman doesn't matter to me who is a Negro or who is a white person. If they are enemies of our country, then they are certainly my enemies too.
We tried to get to the union officials, Mr. T.O. Jones, who seems to be the spokesman for the union and a former sanitation employee worker. He said he had no comment at this time. However, in talking briefly to some of the men who came out of the building, they seemed to have the feeling that whatever their spokesman said, do this, they would do. But as we said, this is only one of a series of meetings. Another one was a meeting with Henry Loeb and Public Works Director Henry Blackburn. They had a meeting this morning, and out of that meeting came this statement from Mayor Loeb.
This is not New York, and nothing will be gained by ignoring our laws.
In March 1968, sanitation workers in Memphis initiated a strike, primarily due to dire wages below $1. Yet their actions were not fueled only by economic grievances, but also the tragic death of two fellow co-workers who were crushed by a malfunctioning garbage truck. On the 28th, King and Reverend James Lofton, who had rallied King's support, led a significant march in Memphis, drawing a large crowd. However, the demonstration descended into violence, challenging the notion that King's movement was fundamentally peaceful. Protesters were provoked by undercover informants, both from the Memphis Police Department and the FBI. These agents antagonized the crowd, driving vehicles close to women participating in the march and nudging them with their bumpers. It was later revealed that these provocateurs were hired and paid to disrupt the event. In light of the violence and the march's failure, King returned to Atlanta feeling disheartened as he grappled with a sense of defeat in upholding his commitment to nonviolence. According to Andrew Young, upon returning, King became increasingly cynical about those in his inner circle, expressing particular frustration towards Jesse Jackson. Young recalls that King emphatically voiced his disappointment, suggesting that Jackson seemed more interested and focused on his own agenda rather than collaborating with them.
Like everybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will.
On the evening of April 3rd, Martin Luther King stood at the pulpit of the non-Masonic Mason Temple in Memphis, delivering a legendary speech that would resonate through history. His renowned "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech. In this moment captured in time, he painted a picture of destiny and alludes to speaking on a mountaintop from which he gazed upon the promised land.
And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
This speech drew homage to the book of Deuteronomy, alluding to Moses, who beheld the promised land, yet never stepped foot there himself. Many who recall King's words that night indeed feel they were prophetic, sensing the weight of the world on his shoulders. Those closest to him felt a chilling premonition, like the shadow of death was drawing near.
Long as I have my clams, I don't give a damn about muddy water.
Quote Charlatan's Web. At about 5:55 p.m., King and Abernathy exited room 306, ready for dinner. King then teased his friend Jesse Jackson about being improperly dressed. Jesse did not have on a necktie, as was custom when they went to dinner.
Men in the briefing, friendlies will not be wearing ties.
King then teased his friend Jesse Jackson about being improperly dressed and paused on the balcony of room 306 to chat with those in the courtyard below, including his driver, Solomon Jones. Jones then advised King to put on a topcoat as it was cold outside. King's last words were to musician Ben Branch, who was scheduled to perform that night at a planned event. King said, Ben, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord in the meeting tonight. Play it real pretty. In response to this, Branch replied, okay, Doc, I will. According to Reverend Samuel Kiles, who was standing several feet away, King was leaning over the balcony railing in front of room 306 when a single shot rang out.
I stood here and I stood here. He leaned over the balcony and was talking to Jesse.
King's right cheek was struck in at 6:01 by a single bullet, fired from a rifle.
I'm just
breaking his jaw before lodging in his shoulder. The sheer force of the bullet ripped King's necktie off before he fell backward diagonally onto the balcony. Andrew Young was one of the first to tend to King, and while he initially believed he was dead, he found King still had a pulse. Shortly afterwards, King's head was placed on a pillow. His neck wound was covered with a towel, and a blanket was draped over his torso. He soon lost consciousness. Additionally, photographer Joseph Luo, who was waiting to cover the next part of King's campaign, was staying at room 309 on the day of the assassination. At about 6 p.m., Luo was watching the television in his room when he heard what initially sounded like a loud explosion. Luo then ran out and saw that King had been shot. He was the only photographer in the area, and soon thereafter went back into his room to retrieve his cameras, taking several pictures of the scene. About 2 minutes later, after the shooting occurred, it was radioed to police who were stationed across the street. At 6:09 p.m., King was lifted onto a stretcher and placed into an ambulance, being escorted by several police officers on motorcycles. At about 6:15 p.m., King arrived in room 1 of the St. Joseph's Hospital, still unconscious but alive. King was pronounced dead by Dr. Barrasso at 7:05 p.m. End quote. Charlatan's Web.
Lorraine Motel is a favorite place for Negro leaders to stay while in Memphis. It's a very nice new modern motel. He was on the second floor balcony, standing exactly where these two officers are, talking with some of his aides at the time of the shooting. The scene immediately became confused. Officers ran forward and attempted to secure the area. The shot apparently came from an apartment building directly across the street. The members of Dr. King's staff were there discussing a mass rally which was planned for tonight. They said that suddenly there was a sound that sounded faintly like a firecracker or something, and he was talking about then he was shot. Musical program for tonight's mass rally.
Yeah.
And he had asked you to play a special tune.
Yes.
That Dr. King left his room 306 at the Lorraine Hotel just before dinner to get some air. He walked over to the railing at this spot, and noticing some friends below, he leaned over and began to speak with them. Police say 205 feet away, in a window in a flop house, the assassin waited. He waited, police believe, in a bathroom down the hall from the room he rented but 4 hours earlier. To get a clear shot of his victim, the assassin apparently had to stand in the bathtub, leaning forward to brace his arms on the window ledge to steady his rifle. And this was the view he got. He fired a single shot, hitting his target squarely, and then he ran. Out of the bathroom and along the decrepit hallway, turning, he raced down the rickety wood stairs and out. One policeman said he simply faded. Ike Pappas, CBS News, Memphis.
The assassination of King has been shrouded in numerous conspiracy theories, especially surrounding the alleged gunman, James Earl Ray. Depicted as a stuttering, inept career criminal, Ray was viewed by some as the perfect patsy. A man who wouldn't be mistaken for the sharpest tool in the shed, Ray managed to leave his rifle and binoculars incredibly close to the crime scene. The FBI, renowned for their investigative skills, reportedly discovered his fingerprints on the murder weapon. A J. Edgar Hoover special touch. The James Earl Ray case appeared at first straightforward when he pled guilty to the murder. However, later he claimed that his attorney pressured him into that admission in exchange for a potential book deal with a journalist. He was also told that by pleading guilty, he could avoid the death penalty. Ray contended that he was not the true shooter and that a mysterious man known only as Raoul had orchestrated the assassination. Ray claimed Raoul had been paying him to transport packages and firearms in different cities around the country. While the FBI dismissed Raoul as a mere figment of Ray's imagination, insisting he was fabricated as a scapegoat, the family of Martin Luther King and their attorney assert otherwise, claiming they have identified and located this shadowy character.
The Reverend Jesse Jackson agrees somewhat with Mr. Garrow in saying that James Earl Ray does not deserve a trial until he begins to tell the truth, among other things saying that Raoul never existed. Would you at least agree with that he does need to tell a little bit more of the truth before a trial is warranted?
Well, first of all, Raoul has been located. As I said, there's so many people who are talking about this case as if they're informed. They are the ones that are uninformed.
Anyway, when I was driving out there, they said something about, I had the radio on, said something about Martin Luther King being shot. And then I didn't think too much about that. And then about 10 minutes later, when I was on the outskirts of Memphis, maybe I was actually in Mississippi, they said that they looked for a white man in a white Mustang in connection with the shooting. So I decided then that I'd better, move on out of there. And I didn't make no phone calls or anything, or Raoul or anyone else.
It appears Ray may have unwittingly played part in a broader conspiracy, with Raoul serving as his only identifiable connection. An escaped fugitive on the run, Ray got duped into a gun-running scheme by Raoul with the promises of passports and money.
Where he intended to purchase him, I imagine he purchased him somewhere close to the border, but that was his cover story, and of course he was promised me passports and money and things of that nature, so I didn't really have too much choice. I thought, if I hadn't been a fugitive, I probably wouldn't have went for it. But it sounded plausible, but I just figured you can tell me too many details, because usually people who operate outside the law, they don't go into too many details with their associates, especially someone like me.
Ray had escaped from a Missouri prison and lived for a while in Chicago under his brother's alias, where he saved some money to purchase a car. According to his story, he met Raoul in a bar by the docks in Montreal, who offered to help him obtain passports, but quickly enlisted him to transport packages across the border. In the lead up to King's assassination, Ray alleges that Raoul instructed him to buy a specific firearm in Atlanta and tactical binoculars in Memphis on the day of the shooting. Subsequent ballistics evidence revealed that the firearm linked to Ray through fingerprints could not have been the weapon used to assassinate King.
But you could see the man pretty good.
Yes.
Was the man James Earl Ray?
No.
Several witnesses agree with Grace Walden that Charlie Stevens was drunk at the time of the shooting. But both Grace Walden and Charlie Stevens have told different stories at different times. Walden said in a statement made on the night of the shooting that the man she saw run from the bathroom was a white man, not much taller than she is. She reportedly told the FBI she saw nothing. Now she says,
Charlie picked James Earl Ray here. I don't think the man looked anything like him. First place, I think he was a nigger.
You think the man you saw
was a nigger?
She was destroyed by the state of Tennessee as a witness.
Mark Lane, James Earl Ray's attorney, says the contradictions in Grace Walden's statement are understandable because of the heavy dosages of drugs she was given at a mental hospital. Lane says Grace was put into a mental institution and kept there for 9 years because she refused to identify Ray as the man in the bathroom.
The hospital records show that when she was placed in the institution, they decided that she probably should be kept there until after the trial of James Earl Ray. That's some medical diagnosis.
There's really no dispute among people that know this history well about Mr. Ray's guilt. The real questions that we should be pursuing and that Mr. King should be putting to Mr. Ray are who encouraged and who funded Mr. Ray to kill Martin Luther King Jr. That should be our focus.
You see this guy, David Garrow? He's literally holding the government line. You can tell by just the way he speaks. He speaks as though he doesn't have any personality. He speaks like a computer. He actually speaks like he doesn't even have a soul.
I think what is really appalling here is that Mr. Garrow has built a platform on exploiting my father's legacy. If it were not for my family, Mr. Garrow would not have gained access to my father's papers and many other things that have given him a platform to speak out. And to now come back and say that we're misinformed is totally appalling.
What we have here and what people need to remember is that Mr. Ray, like other segregationist terrorists from the 1960s, did a tremendous amount of harm to the black freedom struggle.
He uses all of these racist and segregationist talking points to try to adopt some favor by proxy from black people. It really is these type of people who manipulate the minds of not just black people, but the public in general. All he was hired to do was be the government watchdog.
And for Mr. King to be misled into believing in mafia conspiracies is so unfortunately ignorant of.
And listen to the way he's talking to MLK's son.
The real history.
Dexter, I met Mr. Ray. He is not a segregationist.
One of the most widely popularized conspiracy theories regarding the King murder involves alleged government complicity. Some theorists suggest that J. Edgar Hoover orchestrated and approved the plot to assassinate King, while others point to Lyndon B. Johnson as the person who issued the order. King's vocal opposition to the Vietnam War created a significant rift between him and Johnson, despite their previous collaboration on landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights and Voting Act. Their relationship deteriorated over the issues related to the Vietnam War. Furthermore, evidence indicates that King was under close surveillance by FBI informants on the day of his assassination. In addition to this, military intelligence was also monitoring him. And an unnamed witness claims that military personnel actually photographed the assassination. This witness furthermore states that the assassination was the result of a coordinated operation involving both the Memphis Police Department and the CIA.
The voice that called for justice and brotherhood has been stilled, but the quest for freedom, to which he always gave eloquent expression, continues on.
Chicago, Detroit, Boston, New York, these are just a few of the cities in which the Negro anguish over Dr. King's murder, presumably by a white man, expressed itself in violent destruction.
Some buildings were put to the torch, while the looters stripped block after block of stores along 7th Street. Police made periodic sweeps up and down the street, tossing tear gas into the crowds, but that didn't deter the Negroes, and as soon as the officers got a block or so away, they resumed their pillaging, running from store to store to gather up everything they could get. It didn't matter then that the clothing might not fit. The important thing seemed to be that they were getting away with it, that the police could not stop them without shooting, and they quickly realized the officers would not shoot.
Quote, declassified FBI files. Quote, page 24. Our investigation disclosed that there were 5 paid confidential informants providing intelligence regarding the racial situation to the Memphis field office on a continuing basis. The intelligence coverage provided by these individuals related to the activities of the Nation of Islam, Black Students Association at MSU, Students for a Democratic Society, Black Organizing Power, Black United Front, Afro-American Brotherhood, Invaders, and the Sanitation Workers' Strikes. There is no evidence that the activities of these informants related directly to Dr. King. Moreover, there is no evidence that would suggest that these informants were connected in any way to the assassination of Dr. King. In addition to the paid FBI informants, an officer of the MPD infiltrated the invaders in an undercover operation. The officer, who was later exposed and is no longer with the MPD, was interviewed by the task force. The undercover assignment began in February 1968 for the specific purpose of infiltrating the invaders, who became active about the same time of the sanitation worker strike. According to the officer, the MPD was primarily interested in the invaders, not Dr. King, because the MPD was concerned about what they might do. The police officer was, in fact, accepted as a member of the invaders and participated in their activities. On the evening of April 4th, 1968, when Dr. King was shot, the informant had been on a shopping trip with Reverend James Bevel and Reverend James Orange. I want you to take notice of the deceptive speech, because they don't divide the section between the cop and the informant. They're done talking about the cop now, the cop who infiltrated the invaders. This is a totally different person. On the evening of April 4th, 1968, when Dr. King was shot, the informant had been on a shopping trip with Reverend James Bevel and Reverend James Orange. The informant said he returned to the Lorraine Motel at approximately 5 p.m. and was standing in the motel courtyard at the time Dr. King was shot. He is positive that the shot that killed Dr. King came from the rear of the buildings, which front on South Main Street. He insists that it came from the rear of the buildings, which front on South Main Street. And I thought this was a very peculiar note in the FBI. So they won't name the informant in the document, but it says here, some critics of the FBI investigation have speculated that Solomon Jones Jr. set Dr. King up for assassination by unduly detaining him on the balcony. Nothing in the evidence reviewed by the task force leads any credence to such speculation. I believe that as well, but I do believe that that information was inserted purposely to throw you off the scent, as a red herring or a diversion. What about the unnamed informant who has yet to be named and may not be named until he dies? I wonder who that is.
As Tactical Director Samuel Evans tells the military men in the briefing, friendlies will not be wearing ties. Now, we looked at last week pictures of Jesse Jackson wearing a tie with Martin King, so you just didn't think Jesse didn't never wear no tie being with Martin King. And that's Jesse and Martin right there, and Jesse at the city council in Chicago with the turtleneck on with the so-called blood of Martin King shirt. But Jesse had on a turtleneck and Ben Branch had on a turtleneck, and the key to that was that the argument was over Jesse not wearing a tie.
One of the most contentious conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination of King is the claim that some of his close friends may have played a role in the assassination plot. Court documents allege that one or two African-American ministers who were with King during his final hours could be implicated in the assassination plot. Reports suggest that a room change initiated by someone in King's entourage before their arrival at the Lorraine Motel may have intentionally put him in the line of fire, allowing a potential shooter to line a clear shot. Additionally, some accounts assert that King was lured onto the balcony's edge by a member of his own group, presumably to give a Memphis police sharpshooter a better target. The Justice Department has denied these claims. However, the same Justice Department has withheld the identities of its undercover agents and informants during its court proceedings. Although these identities are often redacted, it is known that multiple informants and agents were present at the scene during King's assassination. For instance, Morrell McCullough, an undercover agent who had infiltrated the group Invaders, was a member of the Memphis Police Department and later joined the CIA. A photograph taken moments after King's assassination shows him kneeling by Martin Luther King's body. According to FBI official documents, another informant was reportedly in the motel courtyard when King was shot. This unidentified individual was part of King's entourage, having shopped with fellow ministers James Bevel and James Orange before heading to the Lorraine Hotel at 5 p.m. The identity of this informant raises questions. If Bevel and Orange are named, who was the third person in King's inner circle who witnessed the murder? Eyewitness accounts indicate that when the shots rang out, many thought they sounded like firecrackers.
And I heard this thing say, "Bow!" And I honestly thought someone had thrown a firecracker into the air.
Now, that's Andy saying police, that's Andy saying the rooming house, and now on Turning Point, Andy says, I think maybe it came from the bushes. I don't think it came from the rooming house. I only thought when I pointed that way that it came from the rooming house. I watched Kyle say, you see them pointing that way? I pointed that way. I'm trying to figure out who is the first person to point that way.
Also, witnesses recall thinking that the shot came from the bushes, but in the chaotic aftermath, someone bluffed the group into pointing another direction. Some people have speculated that it was McCullough, the undercover Memphis police officer, who was seen kneeling in the photo immediately following. Were they pointing in the direction of the supposed location of James Earl Ray's lookout, the fire station, or the bushes?
A black guy come running around that corner saying, he went that way, he went that way.
Since we know now that James Earl Ray was not the shooter, and ballistics tests find that the murder weapon that was recovered with his prints could not have been the same weapon used to assassinate King, how hard is it to believe that someone within his circle coaxed this image and was a willing participant in the conspiracy?
A black guy come running around that corner saying, he went that way, he went that way.
According to Andrew Young, immediately after the assassination, people around him did strange things. Ralph Abernathy got a jar and started scraping the blood of MLK into the jar, crying, lamenting it was Martin's precious blood. Young said it was weird, but people freaked out and did strange things. Jesse put his hands in the blood and wiped it on the front of his shirt. This story can also be corroborated by Hosea Williams, who was also on the scene and witnessed firsthand the bizarre actions of Jackson.
And I started crying, and then I heard Jesse Jackson say, he told me, Jesse, take our people on to the mountaintop. And that didn't bother me, even though I know Jesse got nowhere near him. And then Jesse said, I held his head in my hand while he died. And that didn't get to me. And then Jesse said, look at my shirt. And I looked around, sure enough, and Jesse Jackson's shirt was drenched in blood. And I realized the only way Jesse could have gotten that blood was stoop down on that floor at the Lorraine Motel and rake that blood off that floor and put that blood on him. And I went crazy. I really tried to kill Jesse. They grabbed us and all that, but that hurt me so bad. The other thing was, when Abernathy came back, says, no need of prayer, no need of crying, no need of nothing. He is gone. It's over with. He's gone to glory. And we called the meeting, the staff meeting, and Jesse claimed to have been ill. And Abernathy told him, Jesse, go ahead to the room and relax. Jesse had to have run like hell that room into that airport because he got out of Memphis to Chicago. All us feeling everybody was still in the motel. Cut the televisions on the next morning. That was Jesse Jackson in Chicago with that same bloody shirt on, telling that same lie. I've never respected Jesse since that moment.
Why is the driver implicated in directing Martin to the edge of the balcony in FBI records? According to witnesses on the scene, Martin spoke to Ben Branch, Solomon Jones, and Jesse Jackson from the balcony. But neither Jackson nor Branch are implicated as co-conspirators in the official FBI records.
This is Sam Evans, the tactical man who gave the briefing, but I'm going to show you Sam Evans walking down the stairs, and his informants are right there in front of him, and he turns his head so he doesn't have to look at them, and they hide behind the pole so the camera doesn't pick them up. This shit gonna knock you out. But he said, man, we ain't never been asked to do this before. This is fun. And the other guy, look at this guy smiling his ass off. And the other guy, what's he smiling at? He said, Captain. He saw the same. Right, you see how men standing on the wall? And the other guy, and this is the black guy who then steps in front of her. Right, get that time. No, like as if the cap said, get in front of them. Will you block them from the camera? Huh? This black guy has a tie on. The black guy has a tie on.
Who was the informant who was present during the assassination that went shopping with Reverend James Orange in Bevel? One may assume it was the African photographer, but according to the official statement, the photographer was watching television at the time of the shooting and then went to grab his camera, which means he was not in the courtyard. But that doesn't mean he wasn't an informant.
And a guy from Africa who had been traveling with us as a newsman from Africa, we found out later on he was working for the CIA. No, the FBI, working for the FBI.
Why did Martin stay at the Lorraine Motel? According to documented testimony, King preferred staying in nicer white hotels in more affluent neighborhoods. According to other testimonies, the Lorraine Hotel was considered a cheap roach motel with frequency of drug abuse and prostitution on its grounds. But the owner of the Lorraine testified that Martin had stayed there several times over the prior decade, despite the fact that due to his rising popularity and income, he preferred finer accommodations. Was Jesse Jackson purely driven by ambition, or was he somehow involved in the conspiracy? Jackson has consistently maintained that James Earl Ray was the lone gunman. Why then has he gone to great lengths to dismiss any notion of Raoul?
The Reverend Jesse Jackson agrees somewhat with Mr. Garrow, saying that James Earl Ray does not deserve a trial until he begins to tell the truth, among other things saying that Raoul never existed. Would you at least agree with that he does need to tell a little bit more of the truth before a trial is warranted?
Clubhouse and looked an old, poor, snaggletooth white lady in the face named Grace Stevens. Well, she was the one in the room with the door open in the hallway. She's the one who saw the person come out of the bathroom and run down the step after she heard the shot. She's the one who was showing pictures later on and said, no, this is not the man. I said, she described the man so that there are at least two descriptions of the man, the one that fits the person she saw and the one that fits James Earl Ray.
I don't think the man looked anything like him. First place, I think he was a nigger.
You think the man you saw
Was a nigger.
I said, Dr. King. That was it. I said, Dr. King. Just as he straightened up, I said, Dr. King. And the bullet exploded in his face. And evidently it came from...
Was Jesse Jackson really just ambitious? Or was he involved in the plot to assassinate Martin Luther King? Why has Jesse always remained steadfast that James Earl Ray was the actual shooter? And why has Jesse gone through such lengths to dismiss the existence of Raoul? Why doesn't Jesse have a tie on? He says himself that he and Martin had a discussion about his attire just before he was assassinated. Why did Jesse intentionally soak his shirt in Martin's blood? Were his bizarre actions actually born out of grief? Or was it a calculated move to seize an opportunity?
And then Jesse said, look at my shirt. And I looked around, sure enough, and Jesse Jackson's shirt was drenched in blood. And I realized the only way Jesse could have gotten that blood was stoop down on that floor at the Lorraine Motel and rake that blood off that floor and put that blood on him. And I went crazy. I really tried to kill Jesse.
In the height of tragedy, why did Jesse immediately abandon his closest friends when they needed him the most? Why was it so important for him to get to Chicago before sunrise?
I had to have run like hell that room into that airport because he got out of Memphis to Chicago. All us feeling, everybody was still in the motel. Cut the televisions on the next morning. That was Jesse Jackson in Chicago with that same bloody shirt on, telling that same lie.
Is it so hard to conceive that people within Martin's inner circle willingly played a role within the assassination plot? Was this a scripted assassination, or was it a legitimate assassination? Was Martin just keenly aware of the impending circumstances, or did he know the entire time that he was going to be assassinated? Perhaps he offered himself up as a martyr for the movement based upon some secret agreement. These things we may never know. On the next episode of Boulè, the Agent.
informant. You know, the informant Harrison was Hosea's fraternity brother. And we know Jesse was Omega, we know Mark was Alpha, we know that the informant was a fraternity brother, we know Hosea was a fraternity, Al Sampson is an Omega. It appears as if most of the people in SCLC were an oath taker in some form. And that part of the Preacher Alliance, preachers are oath takers.